She thought she had the stage. The lights, the crowd, the rehearsed lines. Candace Owens came prepared to do what she always does. Command the moment, control the conversation, and drown out dissent with sharp words and sharper timing. But what she didn't expect, what no one expected, was the calm question Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez placed like a mirror in front of her. No shouting, no insult, just a quiet line of inquiry that peeled away the surface and shattered the myth. In less than 60 seconds, the studio fell silent. Her past, once buried, now sat between them, undeniable. And all across America, people leaned in, not for spectacle, but for truth. This is a dramatized retelling inspired by real tensions, real contradictions, and real people. While fictionalized for storytelling purposes, the emotions are authentic and the questions raised. They're ones we all live with, because sometimes the most powerful moments don't come from who yells louder, they come from who refuses to look away. The red light on camera 2 blinked once, then again. Steady now. 30 minutes to air. In the control room above the studio floor, someone whispered, "We're hot in 29. The air inside Real America, unfiltered, felt like the inside of a pressurized tank, silent but ready to erupt. The hum of the overhead lights cast a low, electric buzz across the set, merging with the faint tapping of keyboards, producers mouthing silent instructions, and the occasional cough from stagehands who'd learned how to vanish behind curtains. Tonight was supposed to be a routine show. Another panel, another round of debate over justice, race, and personal responsibility in America. But no one was treating it like routine. Not tonight. On set, the stage looked pristine. 3 velvet chairs, 2 angled cameras, a curved table with glass tops polished to the point of paranoia. Behind them, a massive LED screen that flickered with a blue and white graphic reading, "Real America Unfiltered," as if the title alone could guarantee authenticity. Behind the screen, just more production magic, cables and code, makeup kits and nerves wrapped in silence. The first to walk in was Candace Owens. She entered like she belonged there. Heels sharp, stride exact. Black suit tailored to precision, hair styled into an elegant wave that was built not just to impress, but to command. She greeted the sound tech by name, adjusted her mic without instruction, and gave a smile to the segment producer that hovered precisely between warmth and warning. "We ready to stir the pot a little?" she said, loud enough for the camera op to hear. They laughed almost too quickly. Candace was in her element. This was her ring. She didn't just perform, she controlled the rhythm of the room, and she liked it that way. Then, a pause in motion, a quiet that didn't come from silence, but from awareness. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had entered. No entourage, no greeting, just the soft clack of her low-heeled boots across the floor. She wasn't wearing the usual TV face. No overdrawn lashes, no glossy lips, no distraction. Her blazer was a dusky slate color, loose in the shoulders like something chosen for mobility, not attention. In her left hand, a manila folder, slim, unassuming, but held the way one holds something they plan to use. She didn't make eye contact with Candace, not yet, but the space changed. Someone in the tech booth stopped chewing their pen. A floor assistant took one step sideways, instinctively clearing a path that hadn't been asked for. The moderator, a cable news veteran with 3 Emmys and a weakness for long introductions, watched AOC cross the stage and muttered under his breath, "So it begins." AOC placed her folder gently on the table in front of her seat, then stood behind the chair without sitting. She looked around, not at the cameras, not at the producers, but at the room itself, as if memorizing its dimensions, as if calculating pressure points. Candace glanced over, just for a moment, just enough. Their eyes met. Nothing was said, but something passed, a flicker, a recognition not of friendship, but of foresight, like 2 chess players who both realized they already saw the same endgame. 20 seconds of stillness. Then a voice crackled into the earpieces. "Stand by. Going live in 5 minutes. Please hold all movement." Candace smiled to herself, rehearsed and razor sharp. AOC said nothing, but the way her fingers brushed the edge of that folder, slow, deliberate, almost reverent. It told the crew everything they needed to know. She didn't come here to argue. She came with something to reveal. The lights dipped low, then surged to full intensity. The LED backdrop pulsed with animation. "Live in 3, 2, came the final whisper in the moderator's earpiece, and suddenly the world outside the studio went quiet, because millions were now watching. "Good evening, America," the moderator began with his trademark baseline voice, polished and practiced like a voiceover for a documentary that didn't believe in second takes. "Tonight we're joined by 3 distinguished guests to unpack one of the most persistent questions in our national discourse. Has America moved past race, or are we still running from the truth?" The camera cut wide, revealing the full panel. To his left, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, still seated behind that same closed folder, her hands folded gently, her blazer catching the light with the subdued confidence of someone who never needed sequins to shine. Next to her, Senator Raymond Hart, retired but still holding his posture, like the floor of Congress might call him back at any moment. And to the host's right, framed just slightly more aggressively by the camera angle, Candace Owens, smiling with the ease of someone convinced she's already won the argument. "The question tonight," the host continued, "touches not just policy, but identity. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, let's begin with you. You've been vocal about systemic inequality, yet critics argue that identity politics divides more than it heals. Some even say it encourages victimhood over responsibility. What do you say to that?" AOC blinked once, then leaned ever so slightly forward, not to lean in, but to root herself. "I think we need to be very clear," she began, her voice measured but steady, like a teacher beginning the first lesson of the semester. "Talking about race, gender, class, it doesn't create division, it reveals it. You don't fix a leak by ignoring the water." The studio didn't make a sound. "When we call out injustice," she continued, "we're not asking for pity. We're asking for accuracy, for accountability. The danger isn't that identity politics goes too far. It's that denial politics keeps pulling us backward while pretending to move forward." Before the moderator could even cue the next speaker, Candace Owens cut in. "With all due respect, Congresswoman," she said, her smile now sharpened to a blade, "I think it's far more dangerous to tell people they're victims when they have every tool to succeed. We've got billionaires who came from nothing, black CEOs, Supreme Court justices. This narrative that the system is out to get you, it's tired. I'm living proof that hard work, not handouts, changes your life." She leaned back, crossing one leg over the other with precision. Her voice was crisp, almost rehearsed. "You want to talk about truth? Here's mine. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was oppressed to know I could rise. I didn't need permission to win." A camera slowly zoomed in on AOC's face. No flinch, no frown, just the faintest narrowing of her eyes. The moderator jumped in quickly, hoping to keep things balanced. "Strong perspectives from both sides. Congresswoman, would you like to respond?" But AOC didn't jump. She didn't rush. She just tilted her head slightly, as if trying to decide whether to respond with data or with memory. Then, almost imperceptibly, her hand slid toward the folder. Not to open it, not yet. Just enough to remind herself, and maybe Candace too, that tonight wouldn't unfold the way anyone expected. "We'll get to truth," she said softly, her gaze now fixed on Candace. "But first, we have to agree on what we're actually looking at, and who's allowed to name it." For the briefest second, Candace's smile faltered. Not gone, just strained. The air in the studio didn't shift, but the energy did. Somewhere off camera, a producer exhaled a breath they hadn't realized they were holding, and the folder remained closed, but not for long. AOC sat quietly, the studio lights casting long shadows across the sleek, polished table. The faint murmur of the audience barely seeped through the thick glass of the studio walls. In that charged silence, her stillness spoke volumes. She wasn't hurried nor flustered. She was deliberate, calculating, the eye of a storm no one yet saw brewing. Inside her mind, a cascade of thoughts flowed with precision. This wasn't a battle to win through noise or theatrics. It was a reckoning, a moment to unravel the layers of denial and distortion carefully woven over years. Every second of silence was strategic, a calm before the reveal. Her fingers traced the edge of the manila folder resting lightly on her lap. No one noticed yet. The folder was more than paper. It was the weight of history, the quiet echo of truths too long suppressed. She glanced briefly at Candace Owens across the table. The usual bravado, the practiced smile, the sharp eyes that had bulldozed conversations for years, all still intact. But AOC saw past it, to the cracks beneath the surface, the unspoken fears lurking in the background. As the host shifted uncomfortably, preparing to steer the conversation, AOC opened the folder just enough to reveal the first page, a glimpse of something that promised to upend the narrative. The audience leaned forward, unaware that they were on the brink of witnessing a moment that would ripple far beyond the studio walls. A subtle tension thickened the air, a feeling that what was about to unfold was not just another debate, but a pivotal confrontation. The clock ticked on, the cameras rolled, and AOC remained calm, because she hadn't come here to smile. She had come to expose, to challenge, to awaken, and the storm was just beginning. Candace Owens leaned back in her chair with the kind of confident ease that comes from knowing the stage is yours. The studio lights caught the sharp angles of her face as she began to speak, her voice steady, tinged with the familiar mix of challenge and self-assurance that had become her trademark. "Look, America," she started, "there's a story that gets told far too often, that Black people are somehow permanently trapped by systemic barriers, that racism is an unbreakable chain holding an entire community down." She paused, letting the words settle in the room. The camera captured the slight narrowing of her eyes, a signal that the next sentence was meant to cut deeper. "But what we're missing, what the media conveniently ignores, are the facts. The undeniable proof that success is not a myth. We have more Black millionaires than ever before. We have CEOs, entertainers, politicians who not only broke through ceilings, but shattered them. There's not just progress, there's celebration." Candace's tone shifted from declarative to almost exasperated. "And yet, every time someone points out these successes, there's this insistence on portraying the Black community as victims. Victimhood has become currency, something to be traded for sympathy, for votes, for influence. It's a narrative that, frankly, does more harm than good. It encourages dependency, it excuses failure, and worst of all, it robs individuals of their agency." She let that hang in the air for a moment, a knowing smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. "I know what it's like to grow up without privilege. I lived it, but I didn't ask for handouts. I worked hard, I took responsibility, and I'm living proof that you can rise without buying into this victim culture." The room was quiet, the studio lights casting sharp reflections on the polished surfaces. AOC's expression remained calm, her hands folded gently in her lap as she absorbed every word. She allowed Candace to finish her point without interruption, knowing that the power of her response would come not from cutting her off, but from meeting her narrative head-on. When Candace finally paused, the air between them thickened with anticipation. AOC's voice emerged, soft but unwavering, carrying the weight of someone who had long considered this moment carefully. "You're right," she said, her gaze steady on Candace. "You are an exception. No one can deny your achievements, your determination, or the obstacles you've overcome." A subtle shift passed over the studio, as if acknowledging the rare honesty in that concession. "But," AOC continued, "we don't legislate for exceptions. We legislate for the rule, for the millions who don't see their success celebrated, who don't get to break through those ceilings, who still face invisible barriers every day." She leaned in slightly, her eyes locking with Candace's. "When we talk about systemic racism, we're not denying your story. We're recognizing the broader pattern, the reality that while some can overcome, many cannot because the deck is still stacked against them." The words landed with precision, exposing a fundamental contradiction. Candace's confident posture shifted imperceptibly, a brief flicker of doubt crossing her features before she masked it with a tight smile. AOC's calm clarity didn't just respond to Candace's rhetoric, it reframed the entire debate. "Victimhood isn't currency," AOC said quietly. accountability is. Progress isn't about erasing the pain or pretending it never existed. It's about acknowledging it so that we can dismantle the systems that cause it. The audience, both live and at home, felt the weight of the exchange. This wasn't just another back and forth, it was a collision of worlds, one defined by exceptional individual triumphs, the other by collective struggle and resilience. As the moderator prepared to steer the conversation toward the next question, Candace squared her shoulders, her voice regaining its sharp edge. But the moment had already shifted. AOC's words had carved out space for a deeper conversation, one that neither side could easily dismiss. The narrative Candace built so confidently had been met with a counterweight, one that honored both the exception and the rule, the triumph and the ongoing fight. And in that tension, the real story was beginning to emerge. The air in the studio suddenly thickened. AOC's voice cut through the growing tension, calm but firm. That's interesting, because I read a public record last night that says otherwise. From 2007. Her words hung in the space like a sudden drop in temperature, unexpected and impossible to ignore. Candace Owens blinked, once, twice, as if the phrase had slipped past her usual defenses. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice barely masking a flicker of surprise. The practiced composure she carried so effortlessly was now facing something new, something unanticipated. Without hesitation, AOC reached slowly to the folder resting on her lap. The moment felt deliberate, almost ritualistic. The studio lights reflected off the smooth surface as she pulled out a neatly folded document. The paper seemed insignificant in size, but heavy with unspoken implications. She held it steadily before her, as if it were a relic long hidden, now finally unearthed. "That," AOC said, turning the document just enough for the cameras to catch a glimpse, "is a formal complaint you filed against your high school administration in Stamford, Connecticut. You alleged racial harassment. You claimed the school failed to protect you from threats and discrimination." A hushed silence swept the room, the kind of silence that stretches between heartbeats, thick and expectant. Even the moderator shifted uncomfortably in his chair, beads of sweat gathering at his temple despite the cool studio air. The control room was a frenzy of activity masked by silence. Producers exchanging rapid glances, tech crews holding their breath, aware that the unfolding moment was more than just television drama. It was a turning point. Candace's lips parted slightly, searching for words that seemed to retreat from her grasp. The smile she had worn since walking onto the stage faltered, replaced by a tight line that betrayed an inner scramble to regain footing. "Look," she finally said, forcing a laugh, "that was a long time ago. I was a kid. Things were different then." AOC's eyes didn't waver. "Things may have changed," she replied steadily, "but that doesn't mean the truth expires. Your experience was real. The fear you felt was real. The justice you sought was real." Candace swallowed hard, her confident posture slightly diminished. The cameras zoomed in on her hand, tapping nervously against the armrest. The audience at home could almost feel the weight of the history suddenly laid bare. The moderator cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the room. "Let's keep this respectful and focused on the issues at hand," he urged, though his voice carried the strain of uncertainty. But the tension lingered. The audience's eyes remained fixed on the two women, the challenger and the challenged, locked in a moment where personal history and public debate collided. AOC folded the paper slowly and placed it back inside the folder with the same deliberate care. Her voice softened but carried undeniable weight. "It's not about attacking you, Candace. It's about confronting the contradictions in the narrative you present. How can someone who once needed protection now claim that racism is a myth?" Candace exhaled sharply. "I've moved past that. I'm stronger now. That chapter is closed." "But," AOC pressed gently, "closing a chapter doesn't mean erasing the story. We can acknowledge pain and still choose to fight, but denying it ever existed? That's where the harm lies." The studio remained silent, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. The shift had happened, a subtle but profound unraveling of carefully crafted defenses. Candace's eyes darted briefly toward the host, then to the floor, searching for a lifeline. But the moment had passed. The pause that changed the room was no longer just a pause. It was a reckoning. And for those watching at home, it was the moment they realized this wasn't just another debate. It was a mirror held up, forcing a confrontation with a truth that couldn't be ignored. AOC unfolded the paper gently, her eyes scanning the typed words as if reading aloud in slow motion for the room to absorb. "Here's a quote from your own complaint," she said, voice steady and clear. "On several occasions, I was subjected to racial slurs and threats. The school administration ignored my pleas for protection and allowed the harassment to continue unchecked." The studio was utterly still. Even the hum of the cameras seemed to fade, swallowed by the weight of those words. Candace Owens shifted uncomfortably in her seat, lips twitching as if to smile but faltering midway. "That was a long time ago," she said, attempting to laugh off the gravity, her tone light but edged with defensiveness. AOC's gaze didn't waver. "Yes," she replied softly, "and it was real. So why deny it now?" The subtle edge in her voice cut through the rehearsed bravado Candace had carried all night. The layers of certainty, polished and perfected over countless interviews and speeches, began to peel away. It was a moment that didn't just challenge words, it challenged identity. The moderator glanced between the two, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool studio air. He cleared his throat, hoping to steer the conversation back on course, but the tension in the room was palpable, a living thing that seemed to settle into every corner of the studio. For viewers at home, the shift was unmistakable. Social media feeds were already lighting up with clips of AOC's calm, relentless unspooling of the contradiction. Comment sections buzzed with disbelief and reflection. Some expressed shock, others vindication. A few quietly acknowledged a truth they had long sensed but never heard spoken so plainly. Candace's jaw clenched. She stared at the floor for a beat, then lifted her eyes, meeting AOC's, without the usual spark of defiance. The silence between them spoke louder than any argument. AOC leaned forward slightly, her voice firm, but without a trace of triumph. "The truth doesn't expire just because your brand does." That line hit the room like a thunderclap. It wasn't just a rebuke, it was a declaration, an indictment wrapped in undeniable fact. Candace's facade cracked just enough to betray the discomfort she felt, and for the first time in the broadcast, she seemed truly rattled. The polished surface of her carefully crafted persona showed a hairline fracture, and the audience sensed it instantly. The host attempted to resume control, shifting to a softer tone. "Let's focus on how these experiences shape our perspectives today." But the moment had already settled in deep. AOC didn't back down. She knew this was more than a debate, it was a reckoning, a moment when history, personal truth, and public narrative collided on a national stage. "Denying the past," she continued, "doesn't protect anyone. It only leaves wounds open, untreated, festering beneath the surface." Her eyes scanned the audience, both live and remote. "We owe it to ourselves, and to the generations who come after, to confront our truths, even the uncomfortable ones." Candace exhaled sharply, a sound half surrender, half protest. Her fingers tapped nervously on the armrest as if counting down the seconds. The camera lingered on AOC's calm, resolute expression, a quiet power that demanded attention without demanding applause. As the segment edged toward a commercial break, the studio buzz was electric. Viewers across the country were already replaying the clip in their minds. News anchors murmured about the moment that changed the tone, and social media personalities dissected the exchange with newfound respect for AOC's strategy. For many, it was clear, this was no ordinary confrontation. It was a turning point. Because sometimes, no matter how loud the noise, no matter how many headlines you chase, the truth doesn't expire just because your brand does. The tension in the studio lingered like a heavy fog, thick and unyielding. Candace Owens straightened in her chair, as if steeling herself against the unexpected onslaught. Her voice, when it came, was steady but carried a note of weary defiance. "People change," she said firmly. "I'm stronger now. That was a long time ago. A different person, a different world. I've moved past it." Her gaze swept the room, as though daring anyone to question her growth. The audience watched closely, sensing the shifting ground beneath her words. There was confidence in her tone, but also a flicker of vulnerability she tried hard to mask. AOC's eyes remained locked on Candace, calm and unwavering. She leaned forward just slightly, not in aggression, but with the quiet force of someone who has lived through moments far heavier than this. Strength didn't save you, she said softly, deliberately. Justice did. The words settled like a stone dropped into still water. A subtle but undeniable ripple passed through the crowd. Candace's jaw tightened, the muscles visibly flexed beneath her skin. Her practiced smile faded into a tight line as she blinked rapidly, struggling to regain the narrative she'd so confidently held just minutes before. The moderator shifted uneasily, glancing between the two women, caught in the sudden intensity of the exchange. The studio's bright lights seemed to spotlight more than their faces. They illuminated a clash of truths, of experience and denial, of history and its reckoning. Candace swallowed, then tried to steady the room with her voice again. I'm not denying my past, she said, voice lower now, more cautious. But I'm not defined by it either. We can't live in old wounds forever. AOC's response was immediate, her tone firm yet measured. Nobody asked you to live there forever, but acknowledging what happened isn't weakness. It's the foundation for real strength. You got justice because you had the courage to seek it, courage that many don't get to exercise. The audience shifted in their seats. Some nodded, others exchanged glances, feeling the gravity of the moment. It was more than a debate now. It was a shared reckoning with history. Candace's fingers tapped against the armrest, faster this time, betraying the tension she fought to contain. I've fought hard to build what I have, she said, eyes darting briefly toward the camera, and I believe in personal responsibility. That's what helped me rise. AOC's gaze softened, but her voice did not waver. Personal responsibility is vital, but it's not a shield to deny the system's failures. You were protected when you called out injustice. What about those who don't have that protection? What about the ones still waiting for their voices to be heard? Candace's shoulders stiffened, a barely perceptible sigh escaping her lips. The polished armor she'd worn for years showed the first signs of strain. She glanced away momentarily, then back, trying to muster a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The tension was palpable, an almost electric current that filled the room. The moderator's voice broke the silence. Let's continue with how these perspectives influence policy today. But the undercurrent remained. Candace had been reminded, quietly but unforgettably, that her story, once her armor, was also a vulnerability she could no longer fully control. And AOC had made it clear, strength without justice was incomplete. The cameras lingered on both women, capturing more than their expressions. The clash of their histories, beliefs, and futures played out in real time. For the audience watching at home, it was a moment of revelation. The polished veneer of certainty was cracking. The memory Candace Owens had tried so hard to bury was alive, powerful, and impossible to ignore. And AOC, with steady resolve, held the room in the quiet force of truth. Candace Owens straightened her posture and shifted gears. If the personal history was starting to chip away at her confidence, statistics had always been her refuge, a fortress built on hard numbers and carefully selected facts. With a steady breath, she leaned forward, eyes brightening with renewed purpose. Let's look at the facts, she said, voice sharpened, cutting through the tension. Black Americans make up roughly 13% of the population, but account for over 50% of violent crime arrests. That's FBI data, hard numbers, not feelings or narratives. If we ignore these facts, we do a disservice to the communities that deserve better safety and accountability. The studio lights seemed to flare as her words echoed across the set. Some nodded, some frowned, but Candace's tone carried the confidence of a woman who believed the numbers were an unassailable shield. She glanced briefly at the moderator, perhaps seeking reinforcement or a subtle nod to claim the floor. But the moderator's face was unreadable, his eyes quietly fixed on the unfolding drama, with no sign of intervention. AOC remained still for a moment, letting the words settle like stones dropped into still water. Then, with the same calm precision that had become her hallmark, she responded. That's exactly the problem, AOC said gently but firmly. Data isn't neutral. Numbers don't speak for themselves. They're collected, categorized, and interpreted by systems that are anything but impartial. When police patrol heavily surveilled neighborhoods, often poor, predominantly black areas, every infraction, every arrest gets logged meticulously. Meanwhile, crimes in wealthier, predominantly white suburbs are more likely to be dealt with quietly, behind closed doors. Her gaze swept the room, landing on Candace's face before returning to the audience. We have to ask, whose behaviors are being monitored, whose mistakes get recorded, and whose get ignored? Candace's confident mask showed the first cracks. Her voice faltered slightly. You can't excuse violence just because it happens in certain neighborhoods. Crime is crime, no matter where it happens. AOC nodded thoughtfully. No one is excusing crime, but the system's surveillance isn't balanced. It's skewed. This imbalance distorts the statistics and deepens mistrust. When a child growing up in a marginalized community knows they're watched more closely, it changes their reality, how they move, how they live, how they're perceived. The room held its breath. Even the moderator's hands gripped his notes a little tighter. Candace's eyes flickered toward him again, seeking rescue, some cue to shift gears. But the moderator remained silent, caught in the gravity of the moment. Her voice grew just a shade sharper, a hint of desperation creeping in. Statistics don't capture everything, but they're important. We can't ignore them just because they make some uncomfortable. AOC's response was unwavering. It's not about ignoring data, it's about understanding it in context. Without that, we risk blaming individuals for problems created by the system. Candace's jaw clenched tighter, the tension visible now not just in her face, but in the set of her shoulders. The audience sensed the shift, not just in words but in power dynamics. The polished certainty she had wielded all night was being questioned on its foundations. The cameras lingered on her momentarily, capturing the briefest flicker of doubt, quickly masked by a forced smile. AOC's steady gaze met Candace's across the table. Silent but pointed, the unspoken message was clear. The narrative Candace had so carefully constructed was unraveling, one fact and one truth at a time. The studio, still lit and live, had transformed into a battlefield of ideas where the quiet clarity of facts and context held the upper hand. The moment her voice wavered was the moment the debate tipped, and everyone watching knew it. The air in the studio had shifted. Candace Owens, sensing the pressure, grasped at a familiar weapon: statistics. If we're talking facts, she began, voice sharper now, Black Americans make up about 13% of the population, but are responsible for over 50% of violent crimes. That's not a feeling or a theory, that's FBI data. She leaned forward, eyes searching the room, seeking affirmation, her tone edged with challenge. You can't deny those numbers. They speak for themselves. AOC's expression remained calm, unwavering. She did not raise her voice, nor did she interrupt. Instead, she let the weight of Candace's words settle before responding with measured clarity. Are you seriously doing that right now? AOC's tone was low, steady, free from anger, but filled with steel. Throwing out cherry-picked crime data as if it's gospel? It's not. She met Candace's gaze directly, forcing a moment of reckoning. The truth is, data is never neutral. Policing isn't neutral. Surveillance isn't neutral. Her voice softened, drawing in the audience as if sharing a confidential understanding. Do you know how many crimes go unreported or quietly handled in wealthier, predominantly white suburbs? How many incidents are never logged because they're swept under the rug? The studio held its breath. Meanwhile, AOC continued, every incident in a poor Black neighborhood gets documented, arrested, processed. The system watches some communities through a microscope and others through a mirror. We've both read the reports. Why pretend otherwise? Candace's confident posture flickered. Her lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time that night, her smile faltered, and her eyes darted toward the moderator, a silent plea for rescue. But the moderator simply nodded, unable or unwilling to intervene. The tension hung thick, charged with the weight of unspoken truths. AOC's voice remained calm, never rising, yet every word landed with precision. You got justice, she said quietly, not by denying racism, but by naming it. That simple declaration sent a ripple through the audience. The energy shifted from debate to reflection. The camera cut to the live audience, capturing moments of quiet resonance. A middle-aged man nodded slowly, his face lined with years of lived experience. A teenage girl dabbed her eyes discreetly, moved by the honesty and courage unfolding before her. No one spoke, but the emotion was palpable. AOC's gaze softened as she addressed the room, her voice still steady, but now imbued with warmth. "You're not weak for remembering. You're honest." The studio remained hushed, the power of those words reverberating beyond the walls and into homes across the country. Candace sat back, the fight momentarily drained from her posture. The polished armor was cracked, and the audience saw it, clear and undeniable. As the segment moved forward, it was evident that this moment, the quiet strength of naming truth, would linger far longer than any raised voice or sharp retort. The lesson was clear. Courage is not measured by volume, but by the willingness to confront reality with honesty. The moderator cleared his throat, the sound sharper than usual against the backdrop of charged silence in the studio. "Let's move on to current policy," he suggested, voice firm but trying to keep the peace. "There's much to discuss about reforms and actionable solutions." Candace Owens straightened her posture immediately, her fingers reaching instinctively to adjust the microphone clipped to her lapel. The subtle tap of her foot against the floor echoed a restless impatience, a sign that the conversation was slipping from her control. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the camera, then back to AOC, as if daring her to continue pressing the uncomfortable truths. AOC remained composed, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The faintest crease formed between her brows. Not frustration, but the weight of responsibility. She wasn't here to win a debate. She was here to open a conversation long overdue. "We can't fix what we're too ashamed to remember," AOC said softly, her voice steady and resonant. "History isn't just a chapter we close and forget. It's a living part of the present. To move forward, we must first acknowledge the pain, the injustice, and the systems built on that legacy." The studio air seemed to thicken as her words sank in. The audience, both live and remote, held their breath, sensing the gravity beyond typical political rhetoric. Candace's smile tightened, her fingers now drumming nervously on the armrest. She tried to maintain the narrative of personal responsibility, but the certainty was beginning to waver. "I believe in progress," she said cautiously, "but progress doesn't come from dwelling on the past. It comes from empowering individuals to rise above it." AOC's gaze remained unwavering. "Empowerment is vital," she agreed, "but you can't empower people if you erase the barriers they face. Denial isn't empowerment. It's a detour around reality." The moderator attempted to interject, "Congresswoman, the floor is yours for solutions." But AOC held up a hand, pausing. "Solutions must be rooted in truth," she said. "We can't legislate away what we refuse to see. Pretending the past doesn't influence the present only allows those inequities to persist." Candace's foot tapped faster now, betraying her mounting discomfort. She glanced toward the moderator, hoping for a reprieve or a shift in topic, but he only gave a subtle nod, signaling her to stay in the spotlight. AOC's voice softened as she turned slightly toward the audience. "The question isn't about winning an argument on television," she continued. "It's about confronting a history that haunts our policies and our communities. It's about ensuring no one has to relive the injustices that were ignored for too long." A faint murmur rippled through the live audience, some nodding in quiet agreement, others sitting forward, eyes fixed intently on the exchange. Candace swallowed hard, the defensiveness in her posture replaced by a fleeting vulnerability. "I want change," she said, her voice quieter now. "But it has to come with responsibility, not victimhood." AOC leaned in just slightly, voice earnest. "Responsibility is not the opposite of recognition. You can acknowledge pain and still hold people accountable. We have to embrace both to heal and move forward." The clock ticked in the background, the segment nearing a commercial break. The moderator glanced down at his notes, then back up, signaling the shift in the show's pace. But the emotional undercurrent lingered, a silent promise that this conversation was far from over. As the cameras pulled back to wide shots, the tension between the two women remained palpable. Not a battle for victory, but a crossroads where history, identity, and truth collided. In that charged atmosphere, the viewers felt it too. The debate was not about winning sound bites, but about the courage to remember and the resolve to change. AOC's eyes softened as she leaned forward, folding her hands calmly on the table. The studio lights caught the gentle determination in her gaze, a quiet power that seemed to anchor the room. Her voice lowered, drawing in the audience with the intimacy of a confidant sharing a hard truth. "I've heard so many stories," she began, "from people who have been told their experiences aren't real, who've been told they're imagining things when the world has already seen the patterns." Her voice didn't rise, it simply carried weight, carrying the collective memory of countless lives. She listed quietly, almost as if naming names. The young woman who changed her name on her resume because her given name was too ethnic to be considered. The man who dressed down for job interviews hoping to blend in. The teenager stopped at a traffic light, heart racing, because they knew the color of their skin made them a suspect before a word was spoken. A hush fell over the studio, the gravity of those realities settling over everyone. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of empathy, recognition, and the invisible scars that many carry alone. AOC's gaze shifted back to Candace Owens, steady and unwavering. "You once needed someone to believe you," she said softly, but with unyielding clarity. "You needed someone to hear your fear and take it seriously. You needed protection when the system failed you." The camera lingered on Candace's face, capturing a flicker of unease, a momentary unraveling beneath the practiced exterior. The smile that had held so firmly earlier now felt strained, a fragile veil over something deeper. "And now," AOC continued, "you tell others to stay silent, to stop playing the victim. You tell them their pain is a choice, not a reality. But pain isn't a choice. It's a truth." Candace's fingers tightened around the armrest, the tap, tap, tap slowing to a stop. The audience sensed the weight of AOC's words, a mirror held so steadily it left no place to hide. The moderator cleared his throat, but even his voice seemed small against the raw honesty filling the space. "Congresswoman Owens, your response?" Candace exhaled sharply, composing herself. "I'm not telling anyone to be silent," she said carefully. "I'm encouraging resilience, strength." AOC's eyes never left hers. Resilience doesn't mean silence. It means speaking truth even when it's hard. It means refusing to let your story be erased or dismissed. The tension in the room was thick, but it was not hostile. It was real. Two women, two narratives, both rooted in lived experience, but now intersecting in a way that demanded reckoning. AOC softened her tone, looking beyond Candace to the cameras, and through them to every person watching at home. "We all deserve to have our truths acknowledged," she said, "because only then can healing begin." The studio audience, many who had been silent until now, began nodding. Some whispered to each other, others wiped tears discreetly. The conversation had transcended politics. It had become a shared moment of recognition. Candace's jaw worked, as if forming words that refused to come. The weight of AOC's calm certainty seemed to press upon her, making her usual retorts feel inadequate. AOC's voice lowered, carrying the night's most profound message. Holding your truth steady is not weakness, it is courage, and it's the first step toward change. As the segment edged toward its next phase, the room still vibrated with the power of that moment. A quiet confrontation, not with anger or accusation, but with undeniable truth. The cameras pulled back, capturing the two women seated across from each other. One urging silence, the other demanding acknowledgement, and the vast divide between their perspectives. But in that divide lay the spark of something new, the possibility of understanding, and the hope that comes from finally seeing. The room hung heavy with unspoken truths, the air thick with tension, and the weight of years of unresolved pain. Candace Owens suddenly broke the fragile silence with a sharp retort, her voice cutting through the stillness like a knife. "At least I don't cry on cue," she said, her tone laced with sarcasm and barely concealed frustration. The words landed hard, but not with the bite Candace intended. Instead, AOC's response was unexpected. A laugh. It wasn't bitter, not mocking nor derisive. It was a quiet, almost mournful laugh that seemed to carry the burden of countless stories untold, the pain of so many silenced voices. AOC's eyes remained steady, her expression softening with empathy rather than hardening with anger. "I didn't ask for sympathy," she said calmly, her voice measured and sincere. "I asked for accountability." Those words resonated deeply, reverberating through the studio and beyond the cameras. They were not a demand for pity, but a call for justice, a reminder that acknowledging pain was the first step toward healing and change. The moderator shifted uneasily in his chair, sensing the raw emotion radiating from the exchange but unsure how to contain it. The audience, both in the studio and watching from home, was captivated, caught between shock and understanding. For a moment, silence settled, not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that holds space for reflection. Then almost spontaneously, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't scripted or prompted. It wasn't the polite clapping of a talk show audience trying to stay on cue. It was genuine, heartfelt appreciation for the courage and clarity AOC had displayed. Some in the audience wiped tears from their eyes. Others nodded, their faces illuminated by a newfound hope. The applause wasn't just for AOC, it was for everyone who had ever felt unheard, for the stories finally spoken aloud, for the truths too long denied. Candace sat back, the fight momentarily drained from her posture. The smile that once masked her unease faded, revealing a moment of vulnerability. The cameras caught it all, the tension, the humanity, the complex interplay of strength and pain. AOC's laughter still echoed softly, a sound that had shifted the energy of the entire room. It was a reminder that sometimes strength isn't loud or aggressive. It's quiet, resilient, and unwavering. As the segment moved toward a commercial break, the emotions lingered, settling into the hearts of those watching. This wasn't just a debate, it was a moment of reckoning, a glimpse of something deeper than politics. The lesson was clear. True power lies not in dominating the conversation, but in holding your truth steady, even when others try to dismiss it. And in that steady truth, there is strength beyond measure. Backstage, the atmosphere was thick with a mix of tension and disbelief. The cameras had stopped rolling for a commercial break, but the energy lingered, electric, charged, impossible to contain. The heated exchange between AOC and Candace Owens wasn't just another segment. It had become something far bigger, something raw and undeniable, and someone behind the scenes knew it. A producer's assistant, sitting quietly in a dimly lit control room, watched the monitors with wide eyes. The polished broadcast had just cut to a commercial, but the unfiltered raw footage, capturing every subtle glance, every hesitation, every word spoken in calm but undeniable power, still streamed live on a separate feed. It was an angle the network hadn't intended to share publicly, unedited and uncut. With a glance around to ensure no one was watching, the assistant did something that would change the trajectory of the night. A quick tap, a few swipes on a phone screen, and the raw footage was leaked online. No commercials, no polished editing, just truth. Within minutes, the clip exploded across platforms: X, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. The unfiltered moment that television had briefly held captive was now free, spreading like wildfire. Millions of eyes tuned in, drawn by the candid intensity, the palpable tension, and the unmistakable courage of a quiet but firm challenge that few had dared to witness so openly. The clip was everywhere, shared, reposted, dissected. Short segments of AOC holding up the folder, the flash of surprise in Candace's eyes, the calm, unwavering voice that didn't need to shout to be heard. People were mesmerized by the authenticity, the vulnerability, the raw human moment that contrasted sharply with the usual scripted confrontations. News outlets scrambled to catch up, embedding the clip in articles and social media threads. Influencers dissected the exchange, praising AOC's poise and the seismic impact of holding someone accountable with facts rather than fury. Comments flooded in. This is what leadership looks like. Finally, someone who speaks the truth without yelling. You can feel the weight of history in every word. Behind the scenes, the production team was in a frenzy. The executives were scrambling to contain the fallout, but the momentum was unstoppable. The raw footage had captured something that the polished broadcast couldn't, the real, unvarnished moment that people craved. Candace's team was quick to respond with statements and social media posts trying to spin the narrative, but the raw clip had already spoken louder than any carefully crafted message. The silence that followed her attempts to regain control was telling. Meanwhile, AOC remained composed, her phone buzzing with notifications but untouched. She had spoken her truth on the studio floor. Now the world was listening. Across living rooms, coffee shops, and classrooms, the clip played on repeat. Conversations sparked, perspectives shifted. The impact rippled far beyond the studio, into the hearts and minds of millions. And it all began with a simple, courageous leak, a moment when truth broke free from behind the curtain, and the real story finally reached the light. The moment the raw footage leaked online, social media exploded with reactions. Clips of AOC's calm, precise challenge to Candace Owens flooded timelines. People across platforms shared, commented, and debated fiercely. But amidst the clamor, a few phrases began to crystallize. Catchphrases that captured the heart of the confrontation with a punchy clarity. Truth doesn't expire. You needed justice once. You don't get to rewrite your story. These lines quickly became viral mantras. On Twitter and X, hashtags like "Yeah, truth doesn't expire," "Yeah, hold the mirror," and "rewrite the narrative" trended nationally within hours. TikTok creators dissected the exchange in short videos, analyzing AOC's measured tone and the subtle shifts in Candace's expressions. On YouTube, reaction videos poured in, with influencers praising AOC's grace and calling the moment a defining instance of political courage. Memes appeared, juxtaposing AOC's poised demeanor with Candace's momentary discomfort. Screenshots of the document AOC held circulated alongside quotes from the exchange, fueling widespread discussion and calls for accountability. Candace Owens, aware of the viral storm swirling around her, took to social media quickly to defend herself. She released a thread on X that same night, aiming to reclaim the narrative. Her messages emphasized personal growth and responsibility, asserting that her views had evolved and that she was no longer defined by her past. She painted herself as a figure of strength who overcame adversity without relying on victimhood. But the thread backfired. Many followers and observers pointed out the contradiction between her past complaint and her current rhetoric. The very document AOC revealed was public record, and attempts to dismiss it as ancient history or a different time rang hollow to those who had just seen the raw footage. Some responses criticized Candace for trying to rewrite history and accused her of denying the very struggles she once acknowledged. The online conversation grew polarized. Candace's base remained vocal but noticeably quieter, while others outside her usual support circle amplified AOC's message. Comment sections were flooded with personal stories from viewers who related to AOC's insistence on acknowledging truth, with many expressing gratitude for someone who refused to let uncomfortable realities be ignored. Throughout the digital uproar, AOC herself remained silent. She did not engage in the firestorm of replies or retweets. Instead, she let the moment speak for itself. Hours after the segment aired and the clip circulated, AOC posted a single photo to her social media platforms. A simple image of the empty studio chair where she had sat, hands folded neatly on the table in front of her. The caption was brief but powerful, "Hold the mirror steady." That post became a quiet rallying cry. It encapsulated the essence of the confrontation: steadfastness in truth, unyielding in the face of denial. A call for integrity that transcended loud arguments or performative displays. The photo was shared widely, accompanied by captions highlighting AOC's composed strength and her refusal to be drawn into distractions or drama. It became a symbol of mature leadership, of the kind of courage that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Meanwhile, the media's spotlight intensified. News outlets dissected the exchange with a mix of admiration and analysis. Commentators praised AOC's strategy, the careful use of evidence, the calm dismantling of a narrative built on selective memory, and the unflinching presentation of inconvenient truths. Candace Owens' attempts to pivot the discussion toward moving forward were overshadowed by the viral impact of the moment. The conversation was no longer about personal growth or political posturing. It was about accountability and the power of facing the past honestly. The hashtags continued to trend. The headlines were unanimous. AOC had held up a mirror that could not be ignored. The clip was more than a viral moment. It was a turning point in a broader cultural conversation about truth, memory, and justice. And as the digital storm raged, the image of that empty chair, steady, poised, unyielding, remained a silent testament to the power of holding your truth, no matter the noise around you. The next morning, the impact of the viral clip was palpable far beyond the glow of television screens. In bustling barbershops from Philadelphia to Oakland, the conversation was no longer just about politics. It was about truth, courage, and accountability. Men leaned forward, clippers paused midair as the clip was recounted again and again. The quiet dignity in AOC's voice, the steady calm with which she held Candace Owens to account, sparked something deeper than partisan divides. It was a reflection many had long yearned for. In school hallways, teenagers whispered in hushed tones between classes, sharing fragments of the debate they had caught on social media. Teachers noticed the shift in the air, a new language stirring among their students. Words like truth, accountability, and holding the mirror steady. One high school English teacher in Little Rock was moved enough to write the phrase, "You're not weak for remembering, you're honest," across her chalkboard before the day's first lesson. The quote became a rallying point, a reminder that acknowledging pain wasn't surrender, but strength. Church pews echoed with similar discussions. Congregations debated the meaning behind the exchange, contemplating the power of silence over shouting, of measured words over heated argument. In these sacred spaces, the viral moment transcended politics and became a matter of shared humanity, a call to listen, to understand, and to heal. Throughout it all, one thing was clear. AOC hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't dominated the conversation with bombast or theatrics. Instead, she had reflected the truth, steady and unyielding, letting it speak for itself. And that truth proved louder than any shout, more powerful than any spectacle. Her calm strength became a beacon for those who had long felt unheard or dismissed. The clip's resonance wasn't born from anger or performance, but from authenticity, the kind of authenticity that invites connection rather than division. As the days passed, the clip continued to circulate, not just as a moment of viral sensation, but as a lesson etched into the collective consciousness. Barbershops, break rooms, classrooms, and churches all became forums for reckoning, reflection, and dialogue sparked by a single steady voice that refused to be drowned out. And in those quiet, everyday places, the true power of holding one's truth, without yelling, without spectacle, was being understood at last. In a modest living room filled with the soft glow of a single lamp, a television screen flickered as the clip replayed once again. The quiet hum of the evening wrapped around the small space, mingling with the gentle rustle of an old quilt draped over a worn armchair. On that chair sat a grandmother, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed intently on the screen. Beside her, a teenage girl leaned forward, curiosity and something heavier tugging at her gaze. "Is it always like this?" the girl asked softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady but edged with the uncertainty of someone trying to understand a world that often felt too complicated, too unfair. The grandmother's eyes never left the screen as the two women spoke, one calm, the other defensive, caught in a moment that transcended the usual noise of politics and punditry. After a brief pause, she replied, her voice worn but resolute. "Worse. Much worse." She shifted slightly, settling deeper into the chair, then turned to face her granddaughter more fully. "But today," she continued, "today it felt like someone finally said it for us." The girl's eyes widened, reflecting the flickering images of AOC's steady hands folded on the studio table. "For us?" she asked, a whisper that held the weight of generations. "For all of us who've been told to hush, to smile through the pain, to pretend it doesn't exist," the grandmother said. "We've lived with the silence. We've carried the stories that no one wanted to hear. But tonight, someone spoke those stories out loud. Without anger, without spectacle, just truth." The clip played again, AOC's calm voice echoing softly in the room. The teenager watched, mesmerized not just by the words, but by the strength and quiet resilience. How one woman's courage could ripple across time and space, touching lives in ways that shouted louder than any protest. "I've heard the stories from my mother and her mother before her," the grandmother said, her voice thickening with emotion. "Stories of pain and perseverance, but sometimes it felt like those stories got lost in the noise." She looked down at her hands, fingers intertwined like the roots of a tree, strong, enduring. Tonight, it felt like someone took those stories and held them up to the light, not to divide or blame, but to remind us all why we have to keep fighting. The teenager nodded slowly, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and sadness. "I want to be like her," she said quietly, "to speak my truth without yelling, to be strong like that." The grandmother smiled, a gentle warmth breaking through the weight of years. "You can, and you will, because strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet voice that refuses to be ignored." Outside, the night deepened, but inside that small living room, a spark had been lit. The conversation between two generations, one who had endured and one who was beginning to understand, had blossomed into hope. As the clip ended, the screen went dark, but the message remained alive. It was no longer just a moment on television. It was a seed planted in hearts and minds, and it was growing. Behind closed doors and private chat rooms, the aftershocks of the broadcast rippled through Candace Owens's devoted followers. What had started as a predictable rally of support quickly began to show cracks. Text threads and private message groups, once filled with enthusiastic defenses, softened in tone. The certainty that had buoyed Candace's base was now met with quiet hesitations. "She didn't lie," one longtime supporter typed in a small exclusive group chat. "That's what stung the most." The message lingered like a dropped pin in a still room, unsettling the confidence of those who had defended her so vigorously. Another replied cautiously, "I always wondered if there was more to that story. Now it feels like it's all out there." While a handful of voices still rose in defense, insisting Candace had evolved, that she was stronger for leaving the past behind, the chorus was notably smaller. The clear, consistent narrative that once painted Candace as unshakable began to fray at the edges. Some followers expressed confusion, grappling with the dissonance between the woman they'd admired and the revelations now circulating online. Meanwhile, the influencer ecosystem surrounding Candace started to shift. Prominent voices who once amplified her message began to pause, issuing more measured commentary. A few offered tentative praise for AOC's calm and evidence-based approach, a rarity in the hyper-partisan landscape. As the days passed, the impact of the viral clip manifested in more tangible ways. Candace's latest podcast episode, released shortly after the debate, failed to gain the traction it once did. Streams lagged behind previous records, and listener engagement dropped noticeably. The episode, which aimed to refute criticisms and reinforce her message of personal responsibility, struggled to regain momentum. Industry insiders noted the change quietly but clearly. "The narrative shifted," said one media analyst. "The public is hungry for authenticity, and moments like this expose anything less." Candace's usual volume and bravado don't hold the same power when the truth is so plainly laid out. Social media analytics confirm the trend. Sentiment around Candace's brand showed increased polarization. While her core base remained vocal and loyal, the growth of new supporters slowed dramatically. The online chatter was no longer dominated by praise but by questions about her past, her credibility, and her willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Behind the scenes, Candace's team scrambled to adjust strategy. Efforts to pivot the conversation toward policy issues and future plans met with mixed results. Attempts to redirect attention away from the viral clip were hampered by its persistent circulation, bolstered by new commentary and fresh insights from journalists and commentators dissecting every moment. Despite the pressure, Candace maintained her public persona with practiced resolve. She continued to post on social platforms, issuing statements emphasizing personal growth, resilience, and the importance of moving forward. Yet beneath the carefully curated messages, the undercurrent of doubt among some supporters could no longer be ignored. The episode marked a subtle but significant turning point, Not a dramatic fall from grace, but a slow, undeniable shift. The once unshakable foundation of Candace Owens' influence now bore the weight of scrutiny that few in her circle had anticipated. For many watching this unfold, it was a reminder that in the age of instant information and viral moments, the truth once revealed rarely fades quietly. And for AOC, it was a quiet victory, one born not from confrontation, but from steadfast truth, patiently waiting to be heard. In classrooms across the country, civics teachers pressed play on their screens and watched the clip again. AOC's calm, unwavering presence filling the room with a lesson that textbooks couldn't capture. Students, some skeptical, some wide-eyed, absorbed more than just politics. They witnessed leadership that wasn't loud or confrontational, but grounded in quiet strength and truth. Mrs. Alvarez, a high school teacher in Ohio, paused the video just as AOC said, "I'm not here to make you feel small. I'm here to remind you, you're bigger than this." The classroom was silent except for the occasional scribble of notes and the soft breathing of students processing the moment. For many, this was more than a debate excerpt. It was a lesson in dignity and resilience. Beyond schools, leadership seminars and workshops began citing that very exchange as a model for effective communication. Speakers praised AOC's ability to hold her ground without resorting to aggression or theatrics, a stark contrast to the noise that often dominates public discourse. In conference rooms and webinars, professionals analyzed her tone, timing, and measured delivery as the hallmarks of what it means to be the grown-up in the room. In Michigan, a high school debate coach named Marcus played the clip for his team during practice. The young debaters watched intently as AOC's voice, steady and unshaken, cut through the tension on screen. Marcus stopped the video and looked at his students. "This," he said, pointing to the screen, "is how you win with grace." Notice she didn't need to yell or dominate. Instead, she stood firm, spoke truth, and lifted others at the same time. "I'm not here to make you feel small. I'm here to remind you, you're bigger than this." Remember that line. It's not just about debating, it's about leadership. The room buzzed with quiet admiration. For these students, who often equated strength with volume, the clip was a revelation. They saw that real power lies in confidence paired with empathy, a lesson they would carry far beyond the debate stage. Meanwhile, social media continued to echo the sentiment. The hashtag #bigger than this trended among educators, parents, and young activists who embraced the message as a call to rise above division and distraction. The clip inspired countless posts reflecting on how kindness, clarity, and courage can change conversations and communities. Even in unexpected places, coffee shops, barber shops, community centers, the words resonated. People replayed the moment in their minds, feeling a shift in how dialogue could be handled, with respect, with honesty, and without tearing others down. For AOC, the viral moment was never about dominating headlines or scoring cheap points. It was about standing in truth, steady and unflinching, and reminding everyone watching that dignity is the most powerful form of resistance. As the movement sparked by that night's exchange grew, one thing became clear. Sometimes the loudest voice in the room isn't the one yelling the most. It's the one holding their truth steady, inviting others to do the same. The cameras had stopped rolling, the studio lights dimmed, and the buzz of the viral moment settled into the background noise of the day-to-day grind. But for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the moment was far from over. She returned to the relentless pace of committee hearings, district calls, and town hall meetings, where the real work waited. The halls of Congress were no place for theatrics. Here policies were debated in detail, constituent needs weighed carefully, and decisions made with consequences reaching far beyond the headlines. AOC walked those halls with purpose, her focus unwavering, carrying the quiet strength that had made the viral clip resonate so deeply. Despite the sudden surge of attention, AOC refused all requests for press interviews. There were no grand media tours or frantic social media blitzes. Instead, she chose to let her actions speak louder than any viral clip. Her time was devoted to listening, to the stories of her constituents, to the experts shaping legislation, and to the communities often overlooked in the political arena. Back in her district, She answered calls from teachers struggling with funding shortages, small business owners navigating economic uncertainty, and families fighting for access to healthcare. Each conversation was a reminder of why the fight mattered, grounding her beyond the spotlight. Town halls filled with earnest questions and personal stories, moments where policy met reality. AOC listened attentively, never losing sight of the people behind the issues. The viral exchange was a powerful symbol, but the true victory was the trust she built every day, in living rooms and community centers, with faces she recognized and voices she respected. Her team worked quietly behind the scenes, managing schedules and preparing briefings, all while shielding her from the distractions that often follow viral fame. The message was clear. The moment was a stepping stone, not a destination. For AOC, the viral clip was never about chasing headlines or proving dominance. It was a reflection of the steady work required to hold truth and power together. She understood that real change came not from sound bites, but from persistence, day after day, vote after vote, conversation after conversation. While the world debated the clip's significance, she stayed rooted in her purpose. The debates, the policy battles, the long hours, these were the real arenas where history was made. In quiet offices and packed rooms, away from cameras and viral clips, AOC carried forward the momentum with humility and resolve. She showed up not as a viral sensation, but as a representative committed to delivering results. And as the headlines faded and the social media storm calmed, the work continued, steady, focused, and deeply personal. Because for her, the moment wasn't about fleeting fame, it was about lasting impact. As the echoes of the debate slowly faded from the headlines and social media feeds, a deeper conversation began to take shape. A conversation not about personalities, but about principles. Candace Owens had built her brand on being loud. Her presence was defined by volume, provocation, and the ability to dominate any room she entered. Her voice carried across screens, often rising above the noise with sharp retorts and unapologetic certainty. In contrast, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez built hers on remembering who she is. Her strength came from rootedness, in truth, in history, and in the steady conviction of a story unshaken by distraction or spectacle. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She didn't need to create noise to command attention. Instead, she chose clarity over clamor, fact over flash. The story was no longer about Candace. It wasn't even really about AOC anymore. It had become a mirror reflecting the choices we all make about whom we listen to and why. It was a reminder that the loudest voice is not always the most truthful, and that sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest weight. Across the country, people began to reflect on this contrast. In coffee shops, barber shops, and living rooms, discussions sparked not about who won or lost a debate, but about the power of legacy over momentary spectacle. The question emerged, do we value those who shout for attention or those who hold steady to their principles, even when no one is watching? The brands we build, whether political, personal, or professional, carry with them a story. Candace's story was one of loud defiance, relentless challenge, and a brand built on controversy. It attracted millions, stirred passion, and shaped narratives. But AOC's story was different. It was one of consistency, accountability, and grace under pressure. It was about matching actions with words and living openly with one's past and present. As media outlets analyzed the debate aftermath, commentators noted how AOC's measured approach sparked a quiet revolution in public discourse. Her refusal to engage in performative outrage, her insistence on truth grounded in fact and empathy, set a new standard for leadership. Even former critics found themselves reconsidering. Some acknowledged that there was something magnetic about strength that didn't need to shout, a power that grew not from volume, but from integrity. The online communities that had once fervently defended Candace began to show signs of introspection. Conversations shifted from defense to questioning, from certainty to curiosity. Who do we want to be when it's our turn to speak? The one who dominates the room with noise, or the one who commands respect with calm conviction? AOC's quiet resilience inspired a generation grappling with division and disillusionment. Her example offered a path forward, one where truth need not be weaponized or drowned out by shouting, but simply held steady until it is heard. The story ended not with a shout, but with a reflection. It was a story about the legacy we leave behind and the voices we choose to amplify. Because at the end of the day, legacy isn't built in moments of noise and spectacle. It is forged in the steady, unyielding commitment to truth, no matter how loud the world around you becomes. The hum of the high school auditorium was muted as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood at the podium, facing a sea of young faces. The chatter quieted, the restless shifting stilled, and all eyes locked on her. This wasn't a political rally or a televised debate. It was a classroom filled with students eager to learn not just about government, but about courage and conviction. She began, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of years of experience. "You don't need to raise your voice to raise the bar," she said, scanning the room, meeting the eyes of students from all walks of life. "Sometimes the most powerful change happens quietly, through steady, unwavering truth." The students leaned in, some nodding, others absorbing each word like a lifeline in a turbulent world. She spoke about accountability, about standing firm in the face of denial, about the importance of remembering history, not to be trapped by it, but to learn and grow. Her message was simple but profound. Strength wasn't about volume or spectacle. It was about resilience, about the courage to hold your truth steady, even when it feels like no one is listening. After the speech, the camera followed her back to the green room, empty, quiet, far from the bright lights and applause. There she sat alone, hands resting gently on the folder that had become a symbol of the night's confrontation. The folder wasn't just paper. It was a testament to truth, to history, to the power of facing realities head-on. AOC's eyes lingered on the closed folder, a moment of reflection washing over her. No fanfare, no headlines, just a quiet acknowledgement that the work wasn't finished, that truth once spoken still demanded courage to carry forward. Her voice, soft and steady, seemed to fill the silent room. Truth doesn't knock, it shows up, and it stays, even when the lights go off. The words echoed beyond the green room, beyond the cameras, beyond the moment. They carried the promise of perseverance, of unyielding commitment to honesty in a world too often clouded by noise. And with that, the story closed. Not with a shout, but with a steady, enduring light. This story reminds us that true strength isn't measured by the loudest voice or the sharpest retort, but by the courage to stand firm in truth, even when it's uncomfortable. AOC's calm resilience teaches us that holding your ground with dignity can be more powerful than any shouting match. It's a powerful lesson about accountability, history, and the importance of acknowledging our shared struggles to create real change. In a world full of noise and division, moments like these show that clarity and honesty resonate deeper and longer. It challenges us to listen beyond the surface and to value those who speak with integrity rather than volume. What does standing your truth look like in your life? How do you balance speaking up while staying calm and respectful? Share your thoughts. Your story matters too. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Alexandria Rising Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.